Yeah.
Oh, they're working.
Hello.
Can you? Oh yeah. There we go.
Am I on?
You're on.
We're on. Am I on?
Am I on?
Hey, Robbie.
Yeah.
So he's not coming.
Yeah. Today the panel is called "Where is Robbie?" Robbie has been replaced by, I'm going to get this, Jean-Philippe Imbert. Where is that name from?
Lyon, France.
Oh, France.
Ooh la la.
Avec qui? Or where, should I say? Where in France?
In Lyon, in the center of France.
Oh, the center of France.
I tell you.
Fabulous. Great. Well, hello, Jean-Philippe. And we also are joined by Anna Keogh. Say hello, Anna Keogh.
Hi, Anna Keogh.
Everyone
How are
say
you?
hi, Anna Keogh. And I'm reading the names because I'm really nervous I'll get them wrong. Adam Shanley.
Hi.
Say hello, Adam Shanley. Hi, everyone. No, that's not going to do. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
So I think this is going to be a little bit different than the usual kind of panels where everyone sits up on the stage and talks at you and talks with me, and we all talk at each other and we get bored. So I'm going to roam around, and I have some roaming mics as well for people to answer questions. This is called All the Awkward Things About Sex, etc., etc., etc. I don't remember the full title because that's not my job. But today we're going to be talking about all sorts of awkward things about sex, and we're joined by this amazing panel of people. My name is XNTHONY, or Anthony, depending if you ask my parents or not. And I've written out what I do because I always forget what I do, because it's very specific. I'm an artist, isn't that amazing? That works at, it's very specific. Well, I was once considering myself as a performance maker, and then occasionally a drag clown, and sometimes just an asshole. But today I'm staying with artist. That works at this stage beyond any categorization that there is, because I do things that are creative and that make me happy. You know? That's nice, isn't it? Yeah, thanks.
Aww.
I sometimes make pop concerts about growing up in Roscommon. I sometimes hold panels about sex. It's great. Great to see you all here. So what I'm going to do is, before we go into this whole situation, I want to just sort of like start from something that I wrote. I usually don't write things and then read them. I usually learn them off by heart and get them wrong. So today I'm going to read this. I'm going to, hi, I'm going to walk over here. I wanted to just sort of angle the conversation. So we're talking about all the awkward things about sex, but I didn't want it to be like, ha-ha, poo, you know? It's a bit obvious. So I thought we'd go a little bit more intimate, like the theme of the amazing exhibition that's on. Okay. There are perhaps in my mind, and I'm just going to say, whittle it down to two types of intimate engagements, sexual engagements. There is the randy hookup, the grinder hookup, and something that's appeared in London recently called Friends with Tension. Tension. Like this moment.
Perfectly orchestrated.
I was recently told that because I'm now no longer single, so that's fab. But Friends with Tension. I'm going to turn the page over. These are all forms of sexual engagement, and they're fine, they're intimate, that's all good. But what I want to talk about today is that moment, the whoosh of intimacy, that feeling, the feeling that can allow us today, hopefully, to have a really open conversation about our private sexual lives. True intimacy is that indescribable feeling like this, you know? That hurt, did it? No, that's fine. Realizing that you're vulnerable, that this might not just be a quick fuck, that there's more to play, there's an exchange, a risk. Suddenly, all the variables become loaded. You're fumbling, your boner is going, you can't get the condom on, or worse, the condom doesn't even fit and you're scared of saying anything. It's the moment when intimacy becomes a falling. We land into the sanctuary of somebody else, somebody who is not ourselves. I'm talking about this because recently I met someone, actually at a Repeal the AIDS event that I threw in London, where I live, on the day of the results. And I saw this beautiful boy beaming across the floor. Now, in my mind, I was beaming right back at him, but I wasn't. I was being very awkward and pervy. I can reenact it for you. Beam back. And that continued throughout the night. I was wearing really nice heels and a spandex unitard. But anyway, it's besides the point. The next day we met up and we went on a few dates and we fell in love, supposedly. I don't know what that is. And then the intimacy started. Not at first. There's always distance at first, but soon there are longing stares, gentle caresses, and panics. So many moments of panic, sheer panic. There's bad sex at the beginning when everything is too fast and quick and awkward and you're maybe just biting each other's nipples because you know that he likes that. There's the good sex, the tired sex, the sex you do because you ought to, the lazy sex, spreadsheet sex. I actually, do you know what I mean, Jean-Pierre? Blah, blah, yeah? that thing, like booking in sex. Yeah. I actually much prefer, I'm not good with the like thing, you know, I just want to know. There's tired sex, the sex you do because I've already said that. And may I say, lazy sex is probably the best gift you can give to anyone. It shows the height of regard for each other. I think, anyway. That's intimacy to me, the ability and confidence to say, I'm going to be lazy today, you're going to turn over, and we're going to have some fun. With consent. But what happens when you layer upon this that fractious tension that is fear, the question of why was the sex not as good as the one before, fear of love, fear of messing up, fear of all those pubes. You see them everywhere. The licking, the sucking, the commitment. And we can talk about all the awkward things about sex. We think that it can be cute and giggly, feeling up close and personal. Or we could talk about putting a wrapper on a banana and saying, isn't that funny? Or we could talk about the whoosh of vulnerability and just how unfunny it can sometimes be. And hope today that we can actually have a really open, frank conversation about this in the country called Ireland in the year of our Lord 2018. When I was researching this, I decided to ask my friends and flatmates and people about funny sexual encounters, and this is one of them. That night of the shitty dick, or the night I poured poppers up my nose. Have you experienced that? Not judging. That's great. Also, I'll try to be as like as like, you know, pansexual, I think. But yeah, everyone's involved in this, not just the gays, because there's loads of them on the stage. Does anyone else have an awkward sexual situation they would like to bring up, and we'd like to go from there? We could start with with these guys.
You're looking at me.
They've had a few minutes to prepare.
Well, you said you had a few, so you go first.
My kind of awkward sexual experience was actually when I lost my virginity, and actually not the losing virginity part. So it was this guy, I was all very young and naive, consensually, you know, all that kind of stuff. We went, it was one of the kind of first times I'd ever been in the George. We had a few things to drink, and then he said, like, let's go back to mine. It's like, went back to his, we started into it, and he was full on sure there was nobody in the house. Neither of us were out to our family at the time, and his sister burst into the room in the moment of our intimate first time, and kind of like froze and went, I don't know what I'm more shocked by, that you're having sex or that you're gay. And I kind of had that moment of, like, do I continue? Because this is really fucking good. So that was my...
I have a similar story.
Yeah.
Back in 2012, I went travelling around Italy. And I ended up meeting this guy that I ended up dating for a few months afterwards. We travelled back and forward, and we were like fiddly-diddling, as I like to say it, in a toilet in the hostel, which was actually a converted nuns' convent. And the owner of the hostel came into the toilet and said, no, you can't be doing this here, you can't be doing this here. What I'll do is I'll get you your own room, so you can just fiddle-diddle in the room. And so he got us a room, and we were very happy with ourselves. And about 20 minutes into the fiddle-diddling, the door opened. The owner walked in, pulled the other bed up to ours, sat down, and said, no, keep going.
Oh.
And I looked at Sven, we looked at each other, and we both started laughing, which I thought was a good, that we would get on for at least another couple of months. Anyone else? Oh yeah, sure. I think I ended up... I need 2 mics, yes, exactly. I think I was kidding. Well, we all heard you, but yeah, use the vocoder.
I'm just curious, did you continue that time?
No, we laughed at each other, and then we went into another room, and I remember the next day waking up, like, no sheets in the bed, the two of us, and, like, this Asian girl just went, "What the fuck?" And, like, there was, like, you know, hard things. Yeah. I'm going to go to you next.
Okay, you just made me think of a completely different one there now.
Good.
Even though we'd prepared loads.
Thanks.
So my really awkward moment was definitely, I was living in Australia for 2 years, and on New Year's Eve, I was walking home a street in Melbourne that's known for sex workers. And this guy approached us and said, you know, I have $100. Will you do something with me? And I said, no, not me, but I'm sure someone will look after you down the street, whatever. And he's like, no, I want you. I was like, oh, look, you know, it's not me, whatever. And he's like, well, you don't have to do anything. And I was like, well, what, like, what do you mean by that? Yeah, like, you know, there's $100 there, whatever. Okay, I'll see what this is. And so he said, I just want you to watch. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And he's like, I'm going to pull down my pants, I'm going to have a cigarette, and when I'm finished the cigarette, you can go. So I was like, okay. Well, then I was intrigued. So my friend was with me too, so I didn't feel like too unsafe. So we went into a garden, and he said, okay, I'll pull my pants down and you can go once I'm finished smoking. And I said, okay. So he basically pulled his pants down, bent over, and started massaging his bum. And smoked a cigarette. I'd already had the $100 at this point. And so I could have walked away easily, but I was so intrigued to see what was going to happen. So he just massaged his asshole while he was bent over and smoking a cigarette. And as soon as he was finished, we legged it very quickly. But
So he paid you?
Basically.
So you are a person who works in sex?
Basically, yeah. Well, I do work in sex. And actually, that was the thing that made me realise I wanted to study sexuality, because people are amazing, and there are things that turn them on and the things that get them going, and everything that they want to do is just cool and intriguing. So yeah.
And it's amazing to think that this guy had the freedom and the space to provide himself with happiness, i.e. fingering himself while smoking in front of somebody.
Exactly, whatever, It was grand. I didn't have to touch him, I didn't have to do anything. I stood there. It was the best $100 I ever made. Did I quit smoking? No, I didn't.
What did you spend the $100
If anything, I started more. I did. I gave her $50, but like unwillingly, because she was laughing. Okay. And I was like, you know, I just want this. I just want to see what this is about. But yeah, she couldn't stop laughing uncontrollably the whole time. But yeah, so $50. We went out for dinner the next day. It was great.
Right. I should probably at this point explain who these people are.
Yeah, because he's like, you work in sex. I'm like, yeah, I do, but I study it or whatever.
That was the joke, though. Adam Shanley, you probably all know each other because this is Dublin, right? But I'm going to explain everyone just in case. National Sexual Health Outreach Worker for the Health Service Executive, sounds posh, and an activist for PrEP accessibility, Adam Shanley. And then we've got Anna Keogh, Masters in Sexuality Studies, and is working on the review of the Relationships and Sexuality Education Programme. And is that... That always happens. Jean-Philippe Imbert lectures in the comparative literature and sexual studies at DCU. What's your awkward story?
Yeah, I was thinking about it. I don't know. I have a smoking story as well.
Oh, okay.
So that dates back to the 19th century when I was in my 20s. I was living in Lyon at that stage. This is over 2 nights. And I was always fancying my daughters are not in the room, so that's okay, I can go ahead. I was fancying my neighbors downstairs. So I invite him over, blah, 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 and we start meeting, and then we start having sex. And the guy, all of a sudden, I don't know whether it was fellatio fatigue or he just got stuck. And it was basically lockjaw syndrome. So we end up in hospital, and I drive him. It was very flattering because of the girth and everything. I thought, but he was just actually blocked. So we had to go to the hospital, and he had a problem, blah, blah, blah. So I leave him in the hospital because I'm evil, and then go back home. I was a student at that stage. So the following day, I decide to invite him back up to see whether he was fine.
To see whether he was fine.
Yeah. So we start all over again, and the guy, so it stops again, and the guy starts, and it was actually a peanut allergy. So he didn't go to hospital, but then I discovered that there was not one guy but two. They were twins downstairs, and I didn't realize that they were both gay. And I never told them that and I never knew which one, whether it was the Lockjaw twin or the Pin twin. It was awful. It was really embarrassing.
Or the one that was
so
allergic
that was
to your
kind of awkward.
nuts.
That is so interesting. I think we need a round of applause for that story.
No,
That's amazing. All the stories deserve a round of applause. So, yeah, I was thinking a penis or a peanut allergy.
Yeah, penis or peanut.
Yeah, but one of either or both. That's fantastic. I should probably ask, has everyone had sex here? Because we need you to be on board with the content. Has anyone got an awkward sexual experience they'd like to share? And we will get into some more serious topics, but these are serious too. Anyone want to share something? You'd like to say something? What a pity. Anyone want to say something? Because we'll quick. Oh, well, of course. There we go. Sorry, darling.
It was when I was in my 20s in London. I met a Brazilian guy at a club, and he brought me back to his place in East London. And we were holding hands going down an alley, and we see these skinheads go past us, and they sort of check us out that we were holding hands and started chasing us. So we ran to his apartment, and I got into the apartment and thinking, okay, well, we're not going to get beaten to death, but at least we'll have good sex, whatever. And I was really attracted to him. Anyway, he brought me upstairs, and we went into a room, and he switched on the light, and I'm a fucker for good lighting, but this was a naked bulb in the middle of the room, and there was a ladder against the wall, and dust sheets on the floors, and paint, and there's a mattress against the wall, and there was no curtains on the window, and he started to undress me like he wanted to go down on me, and I was like, I'm sorry, this is just awkward as hell, and whatever. And then I hear voices from another room, and I was like, are we the only people here? He's like, oh no, my friends are next door. And I was like, okay, but this is your room. And he's like, well, we'll start here, and then we can move in and do a show for them later on. And I was like, what the hell? And then there was like noise on the stairs, and this all happened within minutes. And then the cats came into the room. Those cats with no fur. One landed up on top of the mattress and was looking at me while he was giving me a blowjob.
What drug were you on exactly?
And then the other one came along and started like going around to my feet. It was weird, like, you know. I was like, I have to stop this, stop. And then there was footsteps on the stairs, and older guy, just looked into the room, and he's like, hey, Paolo, how's things? And he's like, oh, it was cool, I'm just with this guy here. And he goes, hi, Frank. And I went, who the fuck is Frank? And I was like, I really need to go leave now and take my chances with the skinheads. That was it.
Skinheads or skin cats.
Yeah, we're going to just follow that lead, chemsex, assuming straight people know what that is, and it's a thing that happens in both worlds. Can we talk about that? You were talking about this earlier, care and all sorts of stuff. I mean, I've, like you, stumbled my way into one or two situations. One of my own making and one by accident in Dublin a few years ago. I went up to meet a guy, and there was 5 naked Brazilians on a couch. And I started breaking jokes and stuff and taught them how to do certain funny things. And that was great. I took a little bit of cat, which was fab. Do you want to talk about, Ken? You were talking about like care and really, and you can always, anyone put your hands up if you want to ask anything or if you have any questions. Yeah?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm throwing you in there. Talk about chemsex.
Talk about this huge thing. So chemsex being kind of the sexualized use of drugs, I guess, and it being something that a lot of people enjoy. I think I guess it's tightly defined as the use of 3 specific drugs: methadone, GHB, GBL, and crystal meth. And it's used generally to kind of heighten sexual experience. There's a documentary, a film that was made by Vice in the UK, and some of the kind of participants in that documentary were talking about how it feels like a firework going off in your soul, makes you fuck like a porn star. So it does sound like super enticing. And we did in the Gay Men's Health Service, we did a survey of.
It's the mic.
We did a survey of everybody who attended over a 6-week period, and 75% of those who had said that they were using chemsex or engaging in chemsex said that they were in control of it and they were really enjoying it. But they are super potent drugs, and so there was 1 in 4 people that were saying that they were using it potentially to mask up parts of their sex or of their identity that they felt uncomfortable about. So it's a topic that's quite close to my heart. I guess I got kind of involved in working on the kind of topic of chemsex following a night out. Got up, my friend was downstairs, presuming I thought he was making a cup of tea, and we went downstairs and he was dosing out G to get him through the day, and it was something I just was completely unaware of, and so I kind of delved into it a little bit more, and saw that, you know, if one friend had an addiction, then I'm sure that there were more people in our community that were affected by it. And then it kind of got a little bit more kind of, I guess, in my face. So going to parties myself and seeing people passing out in the corners of rooms and stuff. So yeah, I guess we've worked towards kind of creating some harm reduction information, and ensuring, like, starting conversation about how drugs and sex can be really fantastic and they can be very, very enjoyable, and there's tons of people that are doing it for the sheer sexual freedom and the pure enjoyment that it can bring, but it's about, I guess, also creating a structure and supports there for those who, like the 1 in 4 that came through the Gay Men's Health Service, that might find it's actually problematic, or it's actually maybe rooted more in internalized homophobia, or linked to maybe identity issues. And I'm speaking very much in terms of, you know, gay and bisexual men, but it's not something that's specific to those people either. Sex and drugs have been synonymous for years. It's just, it seems to be a particular phenomenon has kind of crystallized over the last little while.
And are these sex conversations awkward to have?
They can be, and I mean that comes from both the service provider and the service user, right? This morning was doing a workshop with those who work in kind of in frontline drug services and sexual health services and stuff like that. And one of the kind of activities that I do is I get people to think about the most graphic word that they know to describe a sex act. And you leave them there for a minute to kind of think of it, and usually what you get is, shag, or today someone said, I really hate saying this, it makes me feel awful, but I hope she's not watching and this has been recorded. But like fingering, makes me feel so.
Makes me feel too.
It makes. And so then I hit them with like an explanation of what felching is, and I go in with the, you know, that's when a guy fucks another guy in the ass. He doesn't wear a condom. He comes in that guy's ass, and then he pushes out that cum into another guy's mouth, and there's like a. And the point of it being is that if we're going to actually have really good, honest conversations in those settings, you as a service provider finding a training session to grimace and kind of, you know, taking a sharp intake of air or whatever. But if I'm sat in front of you as a service user and I open up and I'm talking about the sex that I enjoy and you grimace or you get shocked, I'm immediately going to, like, there's no rapport there. I'm immediately going to kind of shut down. So some of that workshop is about kind of trying to ensure that we kind of take the awkwardness out of these conversations and we empower each other to feel comfortable about talking about those things. So it comes both ways. It's not something that, because I mean, in Ireland we don't really have a great legacy of being comfortable talking about sex.
I was just going to say, because I live in London and the conversations you have in Dean Street or where you get your text and all is so frank. But I remember, you know, having stuff done in Dublin, and you know, it's just feeling so vulnerable. You know, do you think that's a cultural thing, or obviously it is? But I want to bring you in here because I want you to tell us some great stuff that you know. Also, like, we're talking about it very like gay, bi. We're not really. I'm sure straight people have sex as well, don't they?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
We do. Yeah, like, it is a cultural thing, because a lot of the time if people talk about like more non-normative, like not just P and the V sex, if they're talking about it, they're kind of trying to shock especially with young people. Like I work with young teenagers, and you get it like all the time, like, oh, do you know what an angry dragon is? Or like, do you know what this is? And do I have to explain that?
Yeah, what is that?
I don't know what
I saw your face go like, or you know what it is.
The worst thing about this is that an 11-year-old told me this. So, yeah, and I was like you're saying, don't grimace. I was like, yeah, I know exactly what that is, like frantically Googling, like, angry dragon, how do I answer this question? It's basically when a person with a penis is going to come in another person's mouth, and they hit them on the back of the head so that the cum comes out of their nose like an angry dragon. Yeah, so it's probably like one of those myth things that never happens. Clearly non-consensual as well, so wouldn't be encouraged. But yeah, so when we talk, sometimes when young people talk about things like that, it's very much like to shock or to see like, oh, I heard this and I know about it. So still not necessarily a comfort in it. Like, so yeah, I think it is a cultural thing, but we might be getting there a bit more, like if they know those things and they see them, and I don't know.
But you were also talking about this thing, was it one, I don't know, in the notes that I had about pleasure?
Yeah.
Pleasure. I was reading this book called Sapiens. Have you heard of this book called Sapiens? And it says something about the want to have happiness, but there is no such thing as happiness, it's just pleasure. Did you write about pleasure?
I talk a bit about pleasure, yeah. So
as opposed to like sex.
Yeah, so
pleasure.
I would do like queer sex ed workshops, and they're based on research that I did on the resources that we use in secondary schools, so for young people. So it's never mentioned anywhere in our sex education that we might have sex for pleasure. Like it's just it's a man and a woman, and they get married and they have sex so that they can have a baby, and that's it. It's never that they want to have a good time. So when I do queer sex ed workshops, they're for everybody, but like they're seen as queer because we're talking about sexual activity that's not baby making sexual activity. So a lot of interesting ones come up on that. But yeah, so, and it's about having sex for pleasure, and that it's not always about having a baby. It can be for pleasure, it can be for intimacy, like we're talking about tonight. It can, like you mentioned there in your opening piece, like the awkwardness becomes intimate, and then like you can be awkward in the intimacy, and that's all part of the pleasure of connecting with another person, and whether that's sexually or not, that intimacy can be there. So yeah, so pleasure is a massive part that we're not taught about when we're young. Like it's kind of like, oh, don't do that, but like why not? Like it feels good. Why not tell our young people about that? Like this is something that you can enjoy. So that's where I'd come at it, from the pleasure side of things.
Did you want to say something? Did you have a thought brewing? I felt like you did, I heard it.
Okay. No, you were talking pleasure, you were talking gay versus, as well as straight, and so on and so forth. And I think this is a big thing that we have at the moment in Ireland. And you know the way Ireland is often late culturally compared to other countries, which is also great. I think all these notions of gay, straight, it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
I think we shouldn't look in terms of LGBT, but we should look in terms of SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity, and that includes the straights as well. I mean, this is what the World Health Organization recommends. Governments won't go towards that because they've invested too much money into logos and paraphernalia to talk about LGBT, but it's an element which is separating people and which prevents us to understand others' intimacies. And I think there is a danger at the moment when we're talking about intimacy to put it in the very heteronormative thing, because I think if we look at queer intimacies and LGBT, hetero, whatever you want, sexualities, if we look at this under the umbrella of queer, that's easier, because you can have major intimacy with somebody whom you'll never see ever again in the toilets of the Science Gallery. It finishes in half an hour. And, so it doesn't matter, but you are going to share intimacy for half an hour, and that is as good an element, I think. It's as good, it's a sharing of bodies, it's a sharing of smells, it's a sharing of a lack of future, which is great too, because it's generating of a history of the past, which helps you maybe to go back to your husband or your wife. It doesn't matter. So I think we have to bring the intimacy thing into the non-judgmental, fluid, queer panel, and that way we have less awkwardness.
Yeah, and that's something, like I did my master's with Jean-Philippe as my thesis supervisor, so it was obviously amazing. And so that was one of the things that would have come up in the research, was that straight people can have queer sex. Yeah. So, you know, we automatically think that gay men have anal sex, but not all gay men have anal sex. But then as straight people in heteronormative or in heterosexual relationships have anal sex. So we need to talk about, like the sexual activity and those type of like those queer spaces, I suppose, as being something that is open to everybody, and those intimacies are possible regardless of the relationship, whether that relationship is a short one or marriage of 50 years.
Talking about awkwardness, I was talking about it with friends of mine and with two girls who are lesbians, and there was this awkward moment when one of the girls said, "I'm totally turned on by straight porn," and she had to come out as a lesbian enjoying straight porn to her girlfriend, who then said, "Oh, I really love gay porn," where you actually have no women in the whole thing. So it was very interesting. This was an intimacy which was, and I was more worried about whether my chocolate cake was going to work or not. So I had another element. So, but there's bridging between queer straight.
Definitely.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Fellow half Roscommon man, that's one of my questions. Does sex happen in Roscommon? We'll get to that.
When I'm around, yes.
I remember. Keep going.
One of the things I just want to pick up on and just comment is that I'm actually on the foundational program for sexual health promotions right now, run by the HSE. And they have adapted it now. They're actually starting to talk about pleasure. And one of the key things that the coordinators of the course brought up was the word association to pleasure. And straight away, as a hippie-loving pagan who was all hedonistic and everything else, I thought, great, my goddess is going to love this. But there are others in the room who didn't have that experience. Are going, pleasure, sin, indoctrination, what's going on there? So the word choice that they went with was sex for enjoyment. I'm just wondering if there's anything that you, in your journeys, talking with people about that, how did you discover anything on those lines?
Well, I said earlier that we never mention pleasure in the sex ed resources for secondary school students. It is actually mentioned once in the 5 resources, and that's when they talk about having a shower.
That was amazing.
Wow.
Which is like, of course it's enjoyable to have a shower. It's also necessary. It's, you know, so it was really unusual that that's the only time in resources about sex and relationships that they mention pleasure once, got to do with a shower. So yeah, so there must be some sort of negative association that they felt like they couldn't put that in. Now they don't talk about enjoying sex either, but yeah, maybe a different word play. I don't know, do you use anything different?
No, I think the thing that, like, one of the things that I notice the most is actually when we have, like, so working in a sexual health clinic and having people coming in either being diagnosed with an STI or potentially concerned that they might have contracted one. And a lot of the time, like, people get quite, you know, caught up in their head about what that means and can get very hard on themselves. And one of the things that I really do enjoy asking people is, okay, park that for a minute. Did you enjoy the sex?
Yeah.
Is it, like, are you enjoying your sex? Because STIs are a bit of a, you know, they're a bit of an occupational hazard of someone that enjoys sex. And there's, you know, some people get a lot of them, other people get less. But ultimately, we should kind of pull back and consider whether or not it's the sex that we're enjoying. We're probably not going to enjoy gonorrhea, but if we're not enjoying sex to begin with, therein lies the problem, I think. So, and I think that trickles down to having good, proper, inclusive sex education that talks about, instead of it being, you know, you put it in there and it's going to fall off, and, you know, STIs are the worst thing ever to happen. STIs aren't the worst thing in the world to happen. No. I think not getting pleasure from sex is probably, you know, worse.
Yeah.
I remember a few years before I left getting, I never had an STD when I moved to London, which I don't know what it's about, but I got loads when I was living in Ireland. I've had the same amount of sex. But I remember getting gonorrhea maybe in 2012, and I remember the nurse or the medical person demanding the names of the people that I had had sex with so they could call them up. Is that still done? Is that ethical?
Yeah, so it's partner notification, so it's a kind of a public health thing. Initiative, whatever that word is. It's so to try and break the link of onward transmission of that, and I like it can be done in a number of ways. So you can, like that. So I've been diagnosed with gonorrhea, and the health advisor would ask for can ask you to either contact them yourself if that's something you're comfortable with doing, and have maybe the confidence and the self-esteem to want to do. Then you can ask for that provider, the health advisor, to do it on your behalf, and that's what they probably would have asked for a name and a number if you have it. But going forward, one of the big difficulties in doing that type of work, partner notification, is that increasingly we don't have that type of information. It could be a hookup in the toilet, or it could be a grinder hookup where you just know it's Big Boy 69 or something. So that's not going to really get you very far. But I know people do feel very affronted by it, and I think it takes a very skilled individual to do it properly. It might not be something that, maybe in the scenario that you had, that the person was as skilled to approach it as sensitively as they should.
I'm just thinking about the idea of guilt and growing up in like a rural part of Ireland, and you might be 21 or 22 and you might be sexually active, but there is no education people up to that point in not being ashamed. Like I was gay and out and whatever, but I don't feel it now, but I did still feel a lot of shame, and there was nothing in my way or a structure to sort of support that kind of revealing that person. We're talking about this sort of thing of pleasure, and I think if we did work better with, I don't know what stuff's happening now with the young ones and what they're doing to support them, so I don't know. Are they, yeah? I'm just posing those things, I'm not giving any answers.
Well, just from my own side of things, I've actually been part of the course I did, and also looking into youth work with LGBT youth groups. Youth groups are encouraged as part of the RC programme to develop their own sexual health promotions. There's just not really a well-developed platform for them to implement it, unless they've taken part in a course like that, and even then it's tricky. Because especially with LGBT youth groups, you've got to deal with coming out issues, parental consent up to a certain degree. Most people have gotten around it by simply just on a basic, your body awareness, esteem issues, the very basics of STIs, but not going into the gory detail as it was quoted to me. And after that, they kind of just left it. And you're kind of left wondering in the proverbial wasteland, because as Anthony could tell, we live in the middle of nowhere. There is one youth group in Leitrim, there's one in Sligo, they're the two closest to anybody living in Roscommon. Roscommon's huge. That's not going to work.
Grindr in Roscommon is really interesting. I actually went on a date with the guy from Roscommon about a year ago. It was fun. We had a great time. We snuck into can't GDPR. Snuck into his house, 29 years old. It was fabulous.
To come back to what you were saying about whether it is cultural or not, it is very, very cultural. I mean, being French, I don't have the awkwardness chip or the embarrassment chip. It comes out as it is, and you deal with it. And that's the way I was brought up, and it's a good thing. But when I came to Ireland, so that was 19th century, I suppose, 17th century, I was getting married with my wife, my ex-wife, and we both knew very well our sexual history, so we decided to go for a HIV test. So we go to the doctor, this is South Dublin, we're terribly proper and everything, blah, blah, blah. And the GP actually says, well, I don't mind giving you a HIV test, but you have to be careful, because if your insurance company contacts me for a mortgage, I will have to say that you requested a test, which means that you're in the sexual dangerous population bracket. Now, that was completely normal. This was totally awkward. She was very nice about it. She was telling the whole thing. And I know it's still not as it is, but sexual literacy has majorly improved in Ireland since then, which this was only 30 years ago. So we came out of the whole thing, feeling Well, my ex-wife, she was feeling a bit guilty. I wasn't. I just thought the other one was an idiot, but that was it. And luckily enough, because by chance we're going to Paris the week after this thing, we got a free HIV test. Everything was fine, and that was done. But the amount of people that were in the same situation that could not go to get their test because the whole country had not started doing the kind of things that you're doing in order to increase sexual literacy, that was quite awful. I feel I'm 200 years old, so I shut up.
No, I love it. It's interesting. I had that thought that, but I'm not going to go to. I actually want to move the conversation somewhere else. I want to talk about sex and transness. And I want to talk about people that we maybe aren't seeing here today, disability and sex and that whole thing. I once dated a beautiful trans person, and sex was really, really complex. It was like a whole sort of negotiation with body parts and nipples and genitals, things you don't touch, things you do touch, and wild sexual fantasies that I could never live up to. But can we talk about that? Do you have anything you want to say? I'm just like opening that kind of category up, and I think we can open it to the audience as well to sort of engage.
Sex and disability, that's a very interesting thing. I mean,
as opposed to transness as a disability, I mean disability as a disability, I'm not divulging anything. I'm coming from a very heavy disability background. And for those reasons, places that lead to anonymous sex or quick sex or transient sex are absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful, because not anymore than Halan or her saints, but back to the mainstream stuff. But back then, all those places where you could enjoy anonymous sex, never see the person again, or enjoy dark sex where you can only show some part of your bodies, and so you enact and you embody another for a while, which ends up not knowing what they like, but not knowing either what the other likes. And in order to go beyond this awkwardness, a lot of disabled people would end up giving a lot to the other person, the fully functioning person. So that's an interesting thing as well, the pleasures of disability. I mean, this is what Margaret Childerick would go into. And how do you deal with non-normative sex? So there's quite a lot of pleasure there. And we all know that physically our bodies are going to generate further sensory systems depending on the parts that are missing. So if I became blind, all of a sudden I would smell better. And that is both to survive but also to have better pleasure. So it's not all that bad. But it also has an impact, for instance, within government structures. I mean, in terms of, for instance, sex work and prostitution, I started very much on the Ruhama side, and now I'm thinking, and I'm very much on the other side. Mea culpa, and some people will never talk to me again. But I actually completely, fully believe in the positivity of sex work for disabled people. I mean, be it the British government that flies sex workers from Holland, or the French government that flies disabled people over to Belgium to enjoy. And these I was going to ask this question.
Yeah, these sex works are paid for by the respective governments, and that is very good. So we do not cater in Ireland for sex for disabled people. I mean,
Could you explain that a bit more? What's happening?
If you have, like at the moment, I know somebody whose son had a car crash and is now disabled from the neck down, but is also locked inside.
Okay.
Now, this guy is fully hormonal. Everything you go there, and there is about 20 centimeters of ping, and he's never going to have sex anymore. And his parents or his kins are not going to pleasure him. Okay, but that is, we don't know whether he actually he would like to have it or not. And in other countries like Holland or France, the government actually finances sex workers to come and pleasure these people.
Wow.
Okay. And then you have these people can provide signs depending on the type of language which they're speaking, with the eyelids or the fingers, saying I want that again or not, or more or less. So the notion of being involved in a new type of sexuality should also be catered by the government, which should not prevent sex work, which should deal with all types of non-normative sex again.
Yeah.
So back to queer, I'll shut up.
No, it was something I was completely unaware of.
I didn't know anything
but
about
it comes
that
back
either,
to
yeah.
an important question about sex work positivity. Because
Yes.
if you're dealing in a country where sex work is seen as a negative, that's not going to happen. Yeah. You have a microphone. You work.
It's not my first day.
Sorry, I got excited. I'm not sure if this is unprofessional.
Don't worry, it's not.
But yeah, so in terms of disability, I have Asperger's. So I would have a lot of sensory issues in terms of noise and touch. So I've had horrible sex through my teens because I have always been embarrassed to kind of lay down the boundaries with people and say, like, I'm uncomfortable if you cover my ears, I'm uncomfortable if you touch my head, I don't like this, I don't like this, and sometimes I'm not like this, who knows? I would have, whenever I'd have sex with girls and they'd moan really loud, I'd be like, oh my God, shut up. So it was really awkward.
There's a lot of people like that.
Yeah. And so it was really hard for me for a while because I wasn't having enjoyable sex because of this, because I was pretty much uncomfortable because of my sensory issues. And I finally got to the point then where I said, you know, I need to put my foot down, I need to tell people I can't do this to myself. And I did, and I got really insecure all of a sudden because I almost felt like I was taken away from other people's pleasure. I don't want this girl to not moan as loud as she wants if that gives her pleasure, but also really affects me. And if someone touches the back of my neck, I'll tense up, but I also don't want to take away from their sexual experience. So I don't have like anything else to say other than that, but I just thought I'd share.
No, thank you.
That does relate to the idea of sex being, and in relationships just being this sort of insane negotiation.
Yeah.
Where like you're just trying to figure each other out, and sometimes.
Yeah.
You
No,
know?
I have a boyfriend now, and for the past year, so we've kind of met halfway, and it's great.
Yay!
And you can hold on to that mic. It is a bit like that, you know, relationships and like figuring things out, and like we have these terrible ideals about sex and relationships, and everything has to be this way. And I often feel like when I have a good sexual experience with my partner, I get very upset if the second one isn't as amazing. You know what I mean? You start panicking. Does that happen to anyone else? Am I just the only one? Do you want to talk about it?
But it's it's this idea. I'm not sure who was talking about this, but they were talking about like how this idea of like good sex, so like obviously like moaning and stuff like that, but good sex is supposed to be silent. Like there's not supposed to be any like talking or yeah, that feels good, or no, it doesn't, or whatever. Like it's that idea of that. But like if you're never going to explain, like I'm sure you can try and maneuver around a little bit, but you know, eventually you're gonna have to say, I want it this way, or I want that, I like this, or I don't like that. What do you like? Asking those questions. But that idea that it's supposed to be like really natural and really intuitive can sometimes hinder us from actually feeling comfortable in asking for what we want. Like that idea that sex is supposed to be silent, kind of, or non-verbal. So yeah, that hinders us then from asking for what we want, which is perfectly okay. And like that guilt then in being like, oh, if I say I want this, does that mean that I didn't like everything else that they're doing? Like that's not the case whatsoever. Like that was really good, but I'd like you to do this as well, or whatever, you know.
And I think that's where, like, thanks for sharing that, because I think it's really good to kind of hear that, those type of experiences. And I think what you've kind of tapped into there as well is about it getting to a point for you of potentially not experiencing pleasure the way you wanted it for quite a while before you were able to kind of own it and go forward. And that's why I think it's still so, like, it comes back, and I harp on a lot about, as do many of us, is that, like, you probably get to that point a hell of a lot quicker if we had really good sex education at a young age, where you're able to talk about those types of things and really dig deep into why things like, you know, having sensory issues might be a barrier, or having issues with identity might be a barrier to pleasure, and all those kind of things that we can hash out instead of the P and the V type stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So
I do think it kind of boils back down to a lot of that, but thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, and you also touched on another point as well that we talk about in sex ed classes that we're developing now, is about the idea of like compromise and negotiation, but also like not doing anything that you don't want to do. So like there's kind of a fine line there. So like you were saying, like about the moaning or whatever, like you don't want to say like stop doing that, but you also so yeah, there's just that fine line between negotiation and getting what you want, but also giving them what they want, but not like, what would you say, like having your own boundaries as well, respecting your own boundaries. So yeah, if like we need to have conversations around those things for people to understand that. So like we all know that you have to compromise in a relationship, but you shouldn't be compromising on your boundaries.
And I think the main thing would be, as you were explaining, that every time is the first time. So whether it's with the same person forever or whether it's with somebody you don't know, it's a first time. So how do you prepare for the intimacy of the first time?
Yeah.
Through the talking about it. So I think if we go into there, that's an interesting one.
We'll get on
sorry, I just wanted to jump in on something you said, because I thought it was so interesting. You talk about the sort of compromise and negotiation and whatever, and I think it's fantastic, and it's part of the things that we lay down rules for ourselves or guidelines or whatever. But one of the things I want to talk about is that we're so susceptible to power dynamics within relationships, and particularly in the hookup culture, where there have been times when there'd be somebody whose physique that I particularly like or I'm attracted to, and then they'd give me like a laundry list of things that they like to do, and there'd just be one thing on there that I'm like, I'm not into that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I find myself, particularly if the self-esteem is low, that I will compromise and say, yeah, I'll go with that anyway and see how it goes, whatever. But the reason I want to just talk about it is because in the age of the sort of like the narcissistic self or the sort of self-image or whatever, we sometimes things are taken out of our hands in a way by our own self-esteem. And how we feel about ourselves and our own bodies as well. That's what I just wanted to throw in, if anybody else wants to.
Spreadsheet sex.
I think the parameters of cyber-sexual interaction have changed completely the way we interact. I mean, when we see somebody, it's both about, like, in real, it's both about what I like doing, what I would like to do with this person, and how I would like to pleasure this person or these people if there are more than one. But in the cybersex thing, if you look on the gaydar, on the Tinder, on the Puff, all them, whether it's straight or gay, doesn't matter. It's more about what I like and what I expect from the other. So the parameters have completely changed. It's what I want as opposed to what I can give. And it's definitely not about sharing. Now, the older population on the cyber, on these apps, which obviously I wouldn't be part of, are using these apps as one should use in real life, and that ends up completely naff, and then you end up with 65, 19-year-old Brazilians inviting you for pay sex, which is fine too, but it has changed completely.
It's brought up this thing about like app health.
Yeah.
So, and there's been conversations, I think, a little bit more about, when you're creating a profile, being like taking the negatives out of what things, instead of like, I don't want blacks, I don't want anal, I don't want, and instead of it being so negative, being much more inclusive and like, these are the things I enjoy. And I think you're right. I think it becomes a very...
I mean, imagine somebody arriving in the George and saying, hello, I don't like Asian over 25.
Yeah.
You'd end up in jail, which you should, but it's okay to say it online.
It's an acceptable thing to do it online.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
But I think what Will was saying there, like, is with the self-esteem and how much you're willing to give to another person, depending on the confidence that you hold in yourself. I think that's also like, like a pleasing thing, like, like we're like people pleasers, and you feel like, to get that really hot guy that you'll have to do those things that they like. But then, but then when it comes to the intimacy, maybe those things don't matter when it comes to that point. So so I suppose it's going into a hookup culture or a one-night stand or whatever it is, someone that you meet, it's going into that for the right reasons, not because you're trying to make yourself feel better through somebody else, I suppose would be. But that definitely is an issue where we find ourselves looking for validation from others, and that might cause us to put down our boundaries temporarily and then feel bad about it afterwards. So so that is something that I've come across a little bit anyway from talking to people, is that that sometimes we connect with others to make ourselves feel whole, but it doesn't necessarily always work out that way, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Hi. I have a question just to go just a bit back about, you know, how you were talking about conversations during sex and silent sex, not talking about the moaning part, but actually communicating, I want that, do you like this, and everything. I was thinking about just the culture. So for instance, you know, if I watch TV or I watch a movie, they're not going to really talk about sex. Everything is going to come naturally the first time. Even if I watch porn, I mean, in the porn that I watch, they don't talk about, oh, I don't like that, I prefer that. How do you think that this impacts, you know, the sex that people have, like what we see and what we read impacts the sex that we have? And also, actually, is there a change that you see coming? Is there something or someone who wants to change that? Like, is there something done for, I don't know, people to talk during porn or during movies? Or because I haven't seen that for myself.
Yeah. Well, we talk a little bit about this in consent workshops. So we talk about how consent is kind of on an axis, like you can communicate your consent on an axis, so it can be verbal or non-verbal, passive or active, and obviously you don't want it to be passive in any way, really. And so like the verbal active would be, yes, please give it to me now, but that's not always going to happen, or yes, that's what I want. So we talk about different ways of communicating. And sometimes that can be great, you know, like somebody moving their body closer to you as you're kissing, or, you know, you go to put your hand down their pants and they don't push it away. And, you know, so kind of you're feeling it out, I suppose, for want of a better word. But yeah, like you're so right. People in movies or in porn, unless they're filming an awkward sex scene, it's completely quiet. And like you can watch porn on mute and it doesn't make any difference. So yeah, to start in the conversation, I suppose what we're trying to do about that is in consent workshops in particular, I'm not sure if you do the same, but we would talk about like ways to get or give consent. So we would try to talk about like how you can make it sexy. So for example, maybe talking about it beforehand. Now, just because somebody consents to something beforehand doesn't mean they have to do it in the moment. But like, do you like this? You know, a little bit of like sexy texting, Snapchat, whatever. Then we would say something like, you know, it's as simple as, does that feel good? Would you like me to do this? And like, you know, I don't know, said in sexy hushed tones. Maybe that might be nice, I don't know. But yeah, so we are trying to do that in sex education workshops to teach people, like, you know, that it can be sexy, that consent is not a mood killer like everyone thinks. Because like, I did a workshop yesterday and they're like, oh, you're hardly going to say to her like, oh, can I touch you there? Like, that's just stupid. And I was like, well, you can make it nicer, like maybe not in that voice that I just did there, because that definitely wouldn't be sexy.
Yeah, no, put you there, please.
That's my 15-year-old voice, my 15-year-old boy voice. But yeah, so we are trying, but yeah, you're so right, it definitely is. And sometimes with a new partner, you can feel a bit intimidated to ask them, but...
Isn't there joy in that though? Being like, hey, you okay?
Yeah, is this all right? Yeah.
And like, I know when that happens in my sexual life, that makes the other person really happy and they feel very safe. And
I like it when I'm asked. You know? Yeah. So yeah.
But I think also it takes self-esteem and confidence to do it.
Yeah.
Comes back to that.
So it doesn't come naturally to be able to have the confidence to say, are you enjoying this? Are you liking it or whatever?
Because what if they say no?
And are you ready? Are you ready to hear that your sex isn't as amazing as you might think it is? But just on the porn thing as well. Like I guess. One of the things, particularly with the younger guys that come to clinic, hearing them kind of talk about their understanding of sex solely through the gauze of porn. And again, I'm going to go down that road again, but it being like nearly sex education by default.
Yeah.
So and like Will had mentioned earlier, the amount of power dynamics that are at play in porn. And while I love porn and I really enjoy using it to get off, for me, I have the ability to kind of look past what's going on here and getting off on maybe the power dynamics, but not it kind of being attributed then to the sex I have in real life.
It's entertainment.
It's entertainment, and I don't think you know, again, back into sex education, porn needs to be a part of that, and we need to be able to, you know, to pull those two things apart.
I'm going to let you talk, and then you're going to talk.
Sorry,
No. Just to spread it around. I'm going to go up here as well, and I think what we're going to do now is I'm going to try and bring it to the audience more, and to go back to you from the audience. Just switch the power dynamics.
The power dynamics, yeah, great.
He's learning quick. No, it was more an observation really than a question. Just it was interesting to hear about power dynamics and how they play out around consent. Because I actually have a hidden disability as well. I have epilepsy, and a few years ago I was hooking up with a guy. I'd been pursuing him for months. In a stealthy way, very subtle, sexy way.
In the reeds in Roscommon in the bog.
Oh, this is Sligo.
What?
This is Sligo. I'm originally from Sligo.
Oh, sorry. What's his point?
What do you know about this point?
Go on anyway.
Anyway, but the interesting fact was that halfway through, as we're literally taking off the last item of clothing, he turns around and goes, "Wait, you have epilepsy? Oh, that means if you have a seizure, you can't consent." I'm kind of going, what? I'm literally bollock naked here, pursuing you for months. How am I not consenting? We're talking about it. But no, the minute he found out there was a disability, and in his mind, the disability could compromise my memory, retrograde amnesia, I was floored he actually knew about that, to be honest with you.
So, how did he know you were was there like a tattoo saying epileptic?
No.
Do you have like a necklace?
Person, it's community development model work. I'm a person with epilepsy, thank you very much.
Sorry.
No, what happened was I was talking about the course I was on in IT Sligo.
So he copped it from that?
Yeah, because the course is for people with epilepsy. It's the only one in Europe. So.
And so what happened afterwards? Did he?
He literally just said, no, we're not having sex. Get dressed, get out.
Wow.
That was it.
Yeah.
And that was not cool for my self-esteem.
Totally.
Especially with dealing with a new condition that, I still was exploring it as part of this course.
And you don't feel like that was coming from a place of respect where he was afraid that you weren't able to consent?
No, it was coming from a place where he explained later on, he was afraid that he was going to be done.
Okay.
Yeah.
For lack of consent.
Okay.
It wasn't asking me.
Not that he was afraid of pushing your boundaries. Yeah, okay, yeah.
And you're in a relationship now, am I right?
I'm in a relationship.
So how do you negotiate that, if I can ask? If that's
well, at the moment I have seizure control with a lot of medication, but we talk. He knows the type of seizures I have. He knows that if I need to stop and have a snooze and sleep, that's what we do.
So it's talking.
Yeah, back to talking. That's the key. That's the one difference between that guy as a hookup and my boyfriend now. We talk.
To come back to porn that you were talking about, and another type of service provision, slightly different from which is of course the university. And at the moment in Ireland there are only 2 PhDs on porn studies, Caroline and somebody in Galway. So it's quite strange, the notion of porn theory, porn studies, which is very much alive in the UK, which is very much alive in Latin countries or America, has not reached it yet. So we're slowly there. We're trying to involve the Irish players. These 2 names mentioned. There is a porn studies bulletin now, porn studies journal, which is peer-reviewed, blah blah blah. But it's accessible and it's open access. So it's beginning to come. And at university level, we now, this was the first year, but we have it at postgrad level, but also at undergrad level. So I'm working towards a full module on porn, but we're beginning, and we have absolutely no problem with first years on porn. And I was expecting like thousands of, no, it's actually good.
Great sounds, actually.
Is there, like, I was talking to someone about this recently, where someone got really upset when they found out their partner was watching porn, and there was this whole, like, Estelle Perez, that woman, Estelle
Oh, yeah.
She's amazing.
Surprise, yeah.
And this couple, were like, we're going to break up because he's watching porn. And I was like, what? Like, I often talk about watching porn, and it's... Is there a taboo with certain, like, what's the story?
I think it's about kind of the idea of what, like, or society's idea of what a perfect relationship needs to be. I get everything from this one person and that's it. And I think that, like, we're getting better at being able to challenge that and look at different ways in which you can have really good, healthy relationships with people that, are maybe open relationships,
Yeah.
polyamorous relationships, but also on a very kind of a micro scale, being able to be completely monogamous with your, you know,
which is
husband
fine
or
too.
wife, and watch porn that maybe something that you've consensually understood isn't going to happen with your partner. So why not be able to get off using porn from it? You know what I mean? So I think we are definitely in Ireland becoming a lot more willing to kind of experiment with the boundaries of what relationships are, and I think that's kind ofmaybe symptomatic of the older way of looking at what's acceptable in a relationship.
Do you know the Sprinkle Salon? Annie Sprinkle?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who?
So Annie Sprinkle, she is a porn star, and she had something which was called the Sprinkle Salon in New York. And it was basically in her place, and it was a porn space where you could go over and enjoy any type of sex. She's the one that has started eco-sexuality, so connected to it's fascinating. But she created something which was called Coyote. Yeah, the Coyote people. What did it mean? The call off your old tired ethics. And yeah, that's it, the Coyote. And Andy Warhol used to talk about porn as a pedagogical tool, both in terms of embodiment and performance in the Sprinkle Salon and in terms of theory. And I think that is what we should do.
So learning from it in a positive way.
Yeah, yeah. And the closest to which we have would be the kind of exchangist backrooms of Carlo, for instance, because there are a lot, like the straight community have a lot to teach to the gay community, because these things are happening. There is filming, there is porn making, there is a big hub in Carlo, there is a big hub in 2 other countries, and they are moving forward in terms of enjoyment sharing, and anything goes, and it's fine, as you were saying.
Yeah.
Well, there's a really seedy place on Dorset Street that you can go and watch porn as well. It's €2. Yeah. I haven't been there. I've just been outside it.
We have an explanation for that.
So this book is regarding sex work, which we discussed earlier. So you asked about Coyote.
Yeah.
So she formed Call Off Your Old Tired Ethics, Coyote. Got the practice of quarantine and forced medication for arrested sex workers overturned in California, and hosted 12,000 attendees at the Hooker Ball event.
Cool.
12,000.
12,000 people at Hooker Ball. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Where's my
I also
invite?
know her name.
And the website of Annie
Yeah, the
Sprinkle is
website is
quite
class.
amazing. It's an amazing website whereby you have both her porn films, but also her porn philosophy and her eco-sexuality philosophy. She's very much like the sexual version of Anthony or Anthony and the Johnsons, who has now developed this feminist-based philosophy based on femininity and sexuality. But she brings in the hardcore sex into the whole thing, where she claims that she's happy to be a sex worker, she's happy to be a porn star, and that's fine, ground, you know.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of, I'm in my life in London, like my neighbour in 78 is a sex worker, comes over, talks about their life, and my ex was a sex worker, and then my person I do this bingo gig in London every Sunday is a sex worker, and we always open the gig with like, how much did you sell your piss for today? Or, what were you doing last night? And it's like, we try and have this very open, frank conversation, but I just don't know if I'd feel so excited about doing that here.
Well, there is a time for intimacy and a space for intimacy.
But I mean, by having open conversations about it, talking about sex work.
I gave a talk as part of, like, there was 3 or 4 different speakers at a thing down in UCC, and I had a couple of times throughout the conversation, dropped the word sex worker, and it wasn't until the very end that we were going up to get a picture taken or whatever, and one of the other speakers, who was from a I don't want to give away anybody's identity, that worked with those who may be wanting to recover from sexual assault and rape and stuff like that. And she went really, really hard on me for using those words, for saying that it's sex work. I know you were speaking earlier about the kind of move from the Ruhama model, but this idea that, like, she was very vehemently against the idea that sex work is work, and that, the idea that she came at me with was that you, if you're in sex work, it's only ever exploitation. It's only ever that the person is being trafficked, and that's a very real thing, and that's something that we absolutely have to tackle.
By sex workers to prostitutes.
Yeah.
And that's not their argument at all.
Absolutely.
It's probably the only publication that actually asked sex workers.
And that's the thing.
Because a lot of those feminist theories about sex work, they've never asked a sex worker, but they have claimed ownership of sex work as a feminist issue.
Yeah, Caroline says that about porn stars as well. They've never asked them.
We need to give a voice to the sex workers, and that's okay.
And it's very difficult. I mean, like, it was very difficult in that moment. These were all trainee doctors on a medicine course, and like, of all people as well, for them to have a much more nuanced understanding of those who engage in sex work, instead of, you know, should they work in emergency medicine or whatever it is in the future, that if a sex worker comes in and needs help, that it's not this idea of this poor woman must be being exploited, or this man may be exploited, or whatever. It's about that there's more to a story like this. And I think you're totally right. There can be those organisations that kind of go, shh, sex worker, I'll look after you. And I think that's
That's since the 1800s.
Yeah.
That's when the middle class women first started.
Yeah.
Their feminist movements at work. Their first pieces of work were imitation of male work. And it was these, what was it called, the rescue industry, where they started helping the poor and the deprived and the prostitutes on the streets. And the prostitutes were like, we don't need your help, we just pick off, like.
There's been some work done in art, like theatre shows, that are very staunchly opposed to sex work. Opposed, like, you know, very much like, this is black and white, like, no, can't happen, wrong, blah blah blah. But it's just so much more. Like,
but even look at our legislation now. I mean, that by criminalising the purchaser of sex, it actually drives sex work further underground. And the idea that if you have people, sex workers that are working in more than one, it's considered a brothel, and therefore you're making the person someone that may potentially rely on a network to be able to ensure that those who are causing harm are able to be shunned out. And you're making it much more difficult. And speaking just from a HIV perspective as well, you know, it's just, we're not getting that part right. Sex work in Ireland, we're definitely not getting.
And I don't know, I really don't know on this one, but I don't know that there has been any research as to the impact, positive or negative, of this new law on the sex workers themselves. Is there less HIV? Is there less battering? Is there less fear, stigma since this new law? So we would need actually some research to see whether it has worked or not. And if it has worked, fine, I'm wrong in changing my mind. But if it hasn't worked, let's change again. You know.
I don't think sex workers would back research, partly because it would expose them and who they are. And you know, they're always vulnerable.
Yeah, but I'm talking about like anonymized research where we don't know exactly. You know, this type of research where we just don't know. Yeah, exactly.
I think there is some research being done in DCU. Jennifer is doing on sex work migrants, maybe. But yeah, so finding it hard to get participants. So. So that was the point Susie mentioned. Yeah.
Anyone got anything they want to say at this stage?
We went really academic there, didn't we?
And I'm
sorry, guys.
I'll come to you in a second. I'm going to just go over here to you, just because we want to, the left side of the auditorium's silence. Go ahead.
So one of the things for me personally that clarified a lot of my struggles with like dealing with the difference between porn and sex and communication and consent was getting involved in BDSM a lot. Where everything is there's rules that you have to set up before you engage in a particular set of behaviors. So you have to communicate these things ahead of time, otherwise nothing happens. Like, you don't go in without having sat down, okay, this is what I'm willing to do, this is what I'm not willing to do, this is the kind of play that I'm interested in, and this is how far I'm willing to go. And the difference between any sort of BDSM play in real life with any kind of BDSM in porn is like night and frickin' day. Because in porn BDSM, a lot of it is this sort of like almost non-consensual fantasy, which is something that if you want to do in real life, you are communicating sort of like every step along the way. And there's like often contracts that you write up and both sign about things that you're okay with or not okay with. And sort of starting to participate in that kind of play kind of changed the way that I viewed sex in general, because any kind of sex, you could say that there's power dynamics, that you're ceding some sort of control over yourself to another human being. And so the idea that we are willing to jump into that just do it is A, kind of beautiful, and B, also deeply terrifying. I don't know, kind of like when someone's pushing something down your urethra, you really talk about it the whole way through. Like you don't shut up because it might be a bit awkward. You're really like, is this okay? Do you want to try a bigger one, or are we good here? And I don't know. So I found it very empowering for me personally, and it just sort of further helped to show me how that porn is a fantasy, and the difference between like porn and sex versus like BDSM porn and BDSM sex. You have to know that it's fiction, like both those things are, but then also just
so is everything these days. Everything's a myth.
Everything's a myth.
So like, well, that's how we build our worlds. But then Grindr, for example, is that, you know, friends with tension. You know, all these sort of things that we create to sort of live around.
What is friends with tension?
Oh, my flatmate was like, I'm meeting this guy later. On his bio, it said, interested in friends with tension. So the idea is you hang out as friends and you just hope there's something there. It sounds like bullshit.
It sounds like friendship.
It's mad, isn't it? Yeah. Will, and then I want someone else who hasn't spoken to say something.
Yeah, actually, I'm just gonna. The reason I'm saying is I actually want to throw this out, because this isn't just me saying something, but I want to sort of involve the room in this, and is that, say, stepping on, say, to sort of, we're talking about positive and negative outcomes from sex and sexual activity and intimacy, but one of the things that struck me from the time that I was like, you know, in London, young gay guy, just out, whatever, is that there were words for certain STIs like gonorrhea, syphilis, and chlamydia. I had no idea what they were. Absolutely no idea what they were. They just sounded scary to me. And what I wanted to throw out, if anybody else wants to in the audience, is that how, because I'm not sure if that experience to me is the same for everyone else. Does everyone know that bacteria, that it's just bacteria, that it is, you know, chlamydia, syphilis, and gonorrhea are bacteria? And I sometimes think of them as bacteria, like weeds in the wrong place. You know what I mean? You have healthy bacteria in your body, you have unhealthy bacteria in your body, you know? And so I don't have anxiety about them anymore, because I kind of face them and saying, okay, that's what they are. And I just want to get a sort of an idea from the panel or anybody else, what they feel, what word comes to mind when we say the words gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, of course.
I was just thinking back
go ahead.
I was like, gosh, when did I first hear about like words like syphilis and gonorrhea and chlamydia? And chlamydia in particular, I remember in the student health office at my college, there was a poster on the wall that said, "Chlamydia is not a flower." So when I think of chlamydia, I think of like a beautiful flower. Like it's this indelible association.
That's nice. Does it depend on the level of maturity that you can have about these things, I guess? Anyone want to? Audience?
When I talk about chlamydia with young people, I tell them that chlamydia is like a common cold, because so many people get it, and like it's so prevalent at the moment, and you get diagnosed and you take 2 tablets and you don't have sex for a week and it's gone. And so it's like you say, it's not something to be scared of, it's not something to be worried about. It's good that you get tested and you find out that you have it, but yeah, then that's it.
You're totally right. In essence, it's you got talk. I've been talking a lot.
I like your power. You're like,
it's the beard. I was like, oh, talk.
So, my experience is I moved to Ireland 6 years ago, and actually the first time I got an STD was here, like 21 years in Gran Canaria. I never had an STD.
This is yes, unless my immune system's leaked.
And suddenly, like, I moved here well, at the beginning not because I was with my boyfriend, but well, we broke up like in a few months ago. But like, and actually that made me think that probably I have had more sex in the last 6 years in my 40s than 20 in my previous 20 years, you know? So it was kind of like at the same time thinking like, oh my God, I mean like, you know, there's slut shaming, you know, that especially in the gay communities, like, you know, you're a fucking slut, you know, like, you know, especially like, I realized like the first time I got on a studio when I went to the gay clinic in Bow Street, and they ask you like, hey, how many guys have you been to with the last 3 months, and start counting. I was like, oh my God, I'm a fucking slut. So that is horrible.
Say proud.
But the first time was shocking for me. And actually when I went there, I already messaged all of them. Well, some of them I couldn't because it was like, you know, Grindr or whatever. And
letters?
I mean, but if I had if I had them still on Grindr, I was texting them. Some of them replied, some of them didn't. But at least I did my part. Okay. Yeah. So it was shocking the first time. I was like kind of like, oh my God. And I got it a second time, and it was fine. I mean, I was ready. And it's all about information. And I think that is like, we are very lucky here in Dublin having the service that we have in Bugger Street and St. James. You know, I'm from Gran Canaria, which is probably, you know, the most famous gay destination in Europe, and we don't have those kind of services. So it's great. Information is so important. So it's just like, especially because I have seen like a lot of changes in the last 6 years, like especially after the marriage equality referendum. You know, it's like we are more open. You can see that gay people are more open, and you know, so that is great. So, well, I just wanted to say it.
Yeah,
that's great. Thank you.
We love that you've had loads of sex.
Workshop over there, everybody, after the show.
What? Okay, well, you.
Anthony,
I think
this person here has had their hand up for a while.
Oh, okay. You negotiate.
Yeah.
I think there was a little interesting connection there that I think you'll understand about rural life and
basically
sex.
lack of amenities during sex. At the moment, the Northwest has one sexual health clinic open on Tuesdays and Thursdays after 6:30, basically when all the public services stop running. So the fact that I've got a disability means I can't access them. I've spoken to the nurse there in the last 2 weeks, and she says that she's working on 6 months now trying to get a second staffer there, so it frees her up to try and reach out to different groups, areas. It kind of links in with how Grindr is getting used. We talked about BDSM and everything else. There's a lot of people showing up in the Northwest and the Midlands, and they're travelling to have BDSM interactions, but more often than not, they're not striking up that contract. They've seen a porno, but they haven't seen how it was devised and the long list that's developed beforehand. And a lot of those other issues are creeping out because people aren't talking openly about sex, certainly not around the Northwest. So that's one of the reasons why I started the course, but another reason is I was shocked that we can't access anything. Yeah. To get tested, I have to come up here to Dublin.
That was one of the things I was going to pick up on when you said, like, the first STI that you got was when you came to Ireland, and that is actually like strangely not unique. So there's so many guys that'll come into clinic and they'll be like, oh my God, I'm like 30, 40, whatever, and I've moved to Ireland 6 months ago and it's my first STI and I've been having sex since I was 16, 17, whatever. My theory to that is a mixture of not having access to clinics and then also having a delay of time to treatment. So as we spoke about earlier about the partner notification piece, it's super important to try and to stop the onward transmission. So if we get people knowing that they've potentially come in contact with an STI, hopefully they might stop having sex for a little while so that they can get treated, cured by it and then move on. But that's only ever possible if you actually have proper access to get into the clinic and then to be able to actually get treated. So I think we're entirely chasing our tail in Ireland. I think the Gay Men's Health Service is it's a phenomenal service, but it's a bit of an anomaly, and even in itself is completely overrun. We turn away maybe sometimes between 20 and 30 guys a night, and some of them going, no, you have to let me in, like I'm dripping, I need fucking treatment. and we can't. And so what's going to happen to that is that there's the potentially 5 or 6 more infections from that infection that we could have controlled. And that's only from talking about a service that sees 150 people a night. So when you talk about the Northwest, like, people are having sex outside of Dublin, people are having sex that aren't gay. So how do we control that if we don't have proper services? And I think we, from 2015, we've had a national sexual health strategy. I think it's only now that we're really starting to properly push those that both hold the purse strings and hold the power in this country to say, listen, we have to start talking about this and we have to properly resource it too. So I would empower everybody to use their voice to be able to make that happen, because I don't think we're going to get on top of the issue of STIs unless we do.
Technically, we're not actually out of time because we started a bit late, and I don't really care as long as everyone's happy to chat. You want to say something? Please talk, like everyone, you know. Do you want to talk again, Will? No. No.
On the topic of STIs, I'm kind of curious. So I haven't had one, but I've had plenty of friends who have, and just because of hearing how frequent it is, and frankly, a friend of mine, she got it with the first guy she ever slept with, which I was like, oh my goodness, like, I mean, yes, it happens, of course, but like, I guess from what I've heard, a friend of mine who got chlamydia mentioned that part of it is it can cause issues in the future with with pregnancies, because it can affect your uterus. So yes, well, it happens and you shouldn't feel ashamed of it, but I think it's also important to be, to practice prevention. And so to that point, don't get me wrong, I've certainly had sex without condoms, not that I'm proud of it, but like, it happens. And I've been one of the lucky ones, but not lucky ones, but anyways, I guess what I'm curious to hear about is like, what have been people's approaches to, you're about to hook up with someone, and like, do you just stop and be like, hey man, so like, show me your results, or like, how do you approach the topic of STIs, because you don't want the person to feel offended, but it, you don't really bring it up. Do you bring it up ahead of time? And
there's this thing
to crowdsource.
Interesting, really interesting, because like, there's PrEP now, which is great, and then you have like guys or girls, and they're like, you can fuck me bareback now because I'm on PrEP, but I don't think that's actually enough. No, I don't know. People can lie. You just don't know. There's a huge amount of discussion, and like, that's a huge.
My direct answer to that is that you can only ever look after your own sexual health. Right, so that being the very first line that would come to my mind, you need to, like, again, it's all about the kind of thing around confidence and self-esteem. In that moment, should you or can you say to the person, have you been tested recently? And you have to take that leap of faith and trust with that person that whatever it is that they say to you, you either take it or you don't. But ultimately, if you engage in sex with condoms, without condoms, PrEP, whatever it might be, you're only ever looking after your own sexual health. And so I don't think, like, a lot of the time it can happen when people come in to clinic and they've been diagnosed with gonorrhea and they're like, that bastard. And you're like, listen, I mean, you've been diagnosed now, we're going to treat you, and everything's going to be, we'll get over this. But like, this was something that, you empower yourself to make the choice to engage in the sex. And so it's never a blame game. And I think that's something that we really need to try and take away from sex, is that someone gave this to me. Obviously, technically, yes, but one of the things, like, I did a postgrad last year in sexual health in the UK, and one of the things they kept on pushing was stop calling it sexually transmitted infections. They're sexually acquired infections. So this idea that someone has transmitted this to you and therefore there's a blame, it's more, okay, I've acquired this. This is something that I have to recognise is something that I've engaged in and I've taken.
Pokemon.
But yeah, in terms of bringing it up in conversation though, so use it like...
Your voice just comes from like all around.
It does that even without the mic, to be honest. But yeah, bringing it up in conversation. So if you can, beforehand, prior to like when you're actually in the moment, because sometimes that's harder because you want to have sex then too. So you don't really want to, like, it's not going to ruin the moment, but yeah, I know what you mean, like the kind of stopping and starting. So like you could even use tonight as an example. Like if you're texting someone, oh, I went to this really interesting talk, they were talking about STIs, when was the last time you got a test? Do you know? And you can pretend that you went to this talk every night of the year for the next year, do you know? Use it. So anything like that, try to bring it up beforehand. But yeah, it can be difficult, and like that you don't, Like if both of you are naked and you're like, I don't looking at their vagina or their penis, you don't really be like, whoa, when was the last time you got tested? You know, because that's not really going to go down well. But yeah, so I understand your point. It's hard to bring it up in time, but if it's important to you, then bring it up. And if they don't respect it, then you have to think about them as a person then, really.
And it's still very hard in the younger heterosexual situation. I mean, I know of, and this is just an example amongst many other, I know a young girl, she's 24, and she goes to a party. This happened last year. She goes to a party, she meets this guy, the guy is interested in her, they take the taxi. In the taxi to his place, he says, oh, I don't have any condoms with me. So she says, oh, well, then I do, it's okay. To which he answers, oh, you mean that you sleep around? Oh, yeah. And so there is the imbalance in gender play.
Yeah.
Are you on a date?
All three of us.
Yeah, I was wondering.
When's the last time you got
Yeah.
How's the date going?
It's not a date. I know, we play football together.
You have anything?
Yeah,
I want to say, because I've been very, very like shady so far today, so I'm shadied out, so that was good. I want to jump over to this person here. Sorry to.
No.
Do you have any last words?
No, that was great. Cheers, thanks.
Actually, just to comment on that really quick, something that I find works for me is like, I'm like, oh, I got tested 3 months ago, like, how about you? And then you just like break down the like stigma and you're just like real casual about it. Then they're generally like, oh, it's been like a while. I'm like, oh, cool. So like maybe we can chat about that or whatever. But again, to like talk about STIs and gender, I'm in a polyamorous relationship and it's open. And this has been about like 3 years, and I'm like fluid bonded with my partner, so we don't use condoms, but like generally with other people I will, and like it's something like we negotiate, we get tested every 3 months, blah blah blah. So I get tested a lot, and then like we kind of stagger it, so it's like all the time. But I found that like I would get a lot more shame than he would in like in clinics. So like, you know, they'd be like, oh, and you know, do you have the implant or whatever, or like, are you on the pill? I'm like, yeah, and they're like, oh, good girl, and I found it really like patronizing. Or like, you know, like I'll be telling them like, oh yeah, you know, this was like the last person I had sex with. They're like, okay, yeah, or like it's just really, like it's really difficult to go get tested so often when your provider is like staring at you, kind of like really judging you for it, or even like, you know, I was somewhere and I was getting tested. And they were like, oh, well, you'd be very high risk, so, you know, you should get the like vaccine, which was great because I got a free vaccine out of it. But also, like, you know, I feel like personally I'm a lot less risk than a lot of the population because I get tested so often and because I educate myself about sex and that kind of thing. So my partner's never gotten any of this, you know, like, and he, like, the funny thing as well is like I would get judged because you know, we're both bisexual.
Because you're doing the right thing.
They'd be like, even though he hasn't like slept with men in a while or whatever, like when he hadn't the last time I went, like they were kind of like, oh well, you know, bisexual men, you have to be really careful, and like that was like, you know, it was like really, like they would never say that to his face. Yeah. So just if like people have found there's been a gendered aspect to that, I found that like my whole relationship and
And if I can add on this, it's also, we are going to reach a situation in Ireland where there are a lot of people working very well on those things, but the medical humanities side of things needs to happen because GPs need to be trained into dealing with the situation in a normal manner. But go and say that to the universities that train the future GPs. This is not happening.
No, and it's not. And I think, like, I've had a couple of stand-up rows with doctors where they've kind of done but he's been in with gonorrhea 3 times this month. This is awful. And you're like, well, no, it's not. He's been in 3 times this month. He's testing. He's getting, you know, he's getting treated. That's great. Condoms aren't on the table for him. Stop trying to force it down his throat. We have to meet people where they are. Wendy's treat it first and then do it.
Giggle a little bit.
But I think you're totally right, and I think I take your point completely. I think there's the missing link is that, you know, medical professionals and clinicians are being really heavily taught the public health part of it, and so it's the like contain, instead of being able to understand sexuality and relationships and gendered issues as well. I think there's a huge gap there, and it needs to be filled.
So,
not everything is an innuendo.
One more, and then we're going to have to close session.
And can I just quickly, just, if you have a bad experience as well, like, you don't have to put up with that. Try and go somewhere else. Like, I always go to HIV Ireland. They're so friendly. They're lovely. There's a real-time app. You can go out. You can come back in. They have free Wi-Fi. They give you like tea and chocolate and jellies, and it's great experience altogether. And be perfect for a first date.
And just on that point, if you do have it, you have to, this is me getting a little bit excited now, but complain.
Yeah.
Put in a complaint to the HSE.
That's not
every time that anything happens, say in the Gay Men's Health Service, I always encourage, please write this down and complain, because unless people put in complaints, it will never change.
Great. Davey?
So this is 100% showed my age. 1,000 years ago when I was first in college, and we were running the Sexual Health Awareness and Guidance Week, and because I was running the LGBT Society at the time, I just kind of had like an informal chat with the group as part of it, because it's very, male normative, or it was back in like 2005 or whatever, and we were talking about the power of like discussions and whatever, but there isn't really a huge amount of language people have. And in terms of like sex ed going forward, like even in the conversations that are happening here, there's words that like I know what they mean, but I'm not sure a lot of people would know what they mean. And the idea that like sex ed would create like an all boats rise type situation. But one of the like really interesting things that came up in it was when like it was like gay men essentially were talking about it. This idea that like straight people have sex or they have protected sex, and gay men have sex or they have bareback sex, raw. Like there's a real kind of fetishization of whatever, but it also the normalization of the language is that all gay men should be having protected condomed sex, but all straight people don't, and that if the power of like that wordplay that people do or don't have potentially, that if everyone was being taught that in schools, that again that kind of idea that all boats would rise, that like everyone's having several kinds of sex and no one's really talking about it. But I suppose, would that be something you've seen in your work in terms of the language people are using back at you when you talk to people versus what you would know language to be, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I suppose there's still a little bit of that gay sex is the most risky, and
language is super important, and I think when it comes to say in clinical settings using, like, I personally really hate the word risk, because it pathologizes sex. It makes it sound like sex isn't or can't be pleasurable. I much prefer to use the word vulnerable, because you can be vulnerable to an STI or vulnerable to HIV, etc. And that's something I've learned myself. But I think I think it can be, again, you're kind of putting two different types of weight on the same thing. So, people like having unprotected sex, it seems like that you tried your best, but bareback sex is something that you went out to do wrong with. I think language is super important, and I would really hope, sex education, that you're like, if we are going to create a good, inclusive, comprehensive sex education program, that we don't do it in a piecemeal way, that we go in heavy and thick and properly use the words that people that people are using, and being able to ensure that we're not going to skirt around the issues.
One last word, then.
I think in terms of stigmatization of sexual categories, the bisexuals ones are seen as the worst one, because they're playing on both sides, and so in terms of sexuality and bisexuality, it's actually worse than the gay one, because they don't belong to anything, because they belong to everything. This is just me thinking, and with the newer generations, now everybody's fluid, and fluid is the new black and the new bisexual, and they're not fluid in order to be fluid. They're fluid in order not to say that they're bisexual, and that's an interesting one. And in the medical world, I was talking to GPs there. This is the subcategorization that they don't deal with at all. Asexual is safe. bisexual is dangerous and stigmatized, as opposed to gay, which is all over the place and is having sex all the time. It's a very strange one as well.
It is, and I think what we need to move more towards is being person-centered instead of looking at like categories or labels or anything like that. I think what particularly clinicians need to do better is just who is sat in front of me and what can I do for them.
Which is why SOGI is so important, sexual orientation, gender identity. This is just all-encompassing.
Great.
Amen.
Right?
Sorry.
So final message is have as much sex as you want, but get tested.
Talk to people. What?
Yeah.
Thanks for that, guys. And thanks to everyone in the audience for being amazing and interactive and up close. Put your hands together, use your Adam Shanley. Give him a round of applause. Anna, more readings, I'm always good. Anna Keogh. Give it up for Anna Keogh. And Dan Philippe. Woo! And give it up for yourselves. I think this will be on the web. Will this be online at some point so we can all watch that later with our friends?
I'm cringe.
Thanks everybody for coming. We'll put the recipes up online afterwards. Thanks everyone. Bye.